Special Operations Training Detachment, SOD West, Burrow Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Jess and Kevin. If you haven't heard the first part, please give that a listen, where we discussed preparing for NTC and reducing ambiguity between the company and the detachment level. In part 2, we will cover SOF CA communicating with the conventional brigade, measures of performance and effectiveness, and the Civil Military Operational Center's approach to targeting. I'm going to go back to something that Pat and Kevin were talking about. How do you translate that CA stuff onto a product? You know, we're all fairly familiar with like an ISR sync matrix, a common operating picture, but you know, how does civil affairs interject itself into these big Army, you know, products that, like, if a force comm field grade walks into your op center, you can be like, well, sir, this is what we're doing, or ma'am, and we're lacking this, or we can provide you that. Like, is there a good example of something that you guys did or didn't do during the rotation?
So I think what it started with was just like a basic link analysis based off of like some of the coming to here reporting, right? Pulling out some of those personalities and writing them on a board. One of our teams actually did it. 154, they went through and pulled a lot of that stuff along with our L&O, Freddie. That was our brigade L&O. So that link between us and the brigade.
Yep.
Between those two, they really built out a good like link analysis. So taking personalities, linking to them to like specific areas or specific people, whether it may be, so understanding, you know, if they were an enemy, if they were neutral, if they were friendly, and understanding how that all tied in. And then from that portion, we made an overlay with on a map based off what the brigade was doing, what the enemy was doing, you know, have an understanding of that layer. And then we had the civilian side of it. Like, so the personalities in each area, what were their capabilities? You know, we had sticky notes throughout the map. So we could roll it back and be like, hey, this is what, you know, the brigade's doing. This is where it's going. This is what the enemy's doing. This is what they're doing and how we're going to do it. And then we could roll that back and look like, okay, how can we have those effects with the personalities we have? And it was just like we called it the watering hole. Everybody could come around and be like, hey, this is what we want to do. Like with the commander's intent, like, hey, this is what we want to do. Who do we have here? Like, so it could have been in Ujin or Rajesh. Like, who do we have in Rajesh that could do something? And instead of being like, oh, there's something on the wall over there, it was kind of all in one area. So it may have had different overlays where we had to roll it back or roll it forward to see where we were going to do these things. But it just put it all in one area so that we can identify it in just one specific, like the watering hole.
So it was kind of, as far as like physical products, we could use, there are certain programs where you can overlay it on the map and you can have a million things on there. And then physically it's kind of dialed down just because the size of your map and what's important. But I think it was showing that human map on top of the physical map and how your access and placement is beyond where you are physically located behind the flot.
Yeah. Because
you have people that, you know, are still living their life in crisis, in chaos, in war, despite how challenging it may be, but they're still moving. They're still getting through areas, and they can let you know if there's a checkpoint or if all of their medical supplies has been taken. And through that, you've just got physical eyes beyond where you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, you know, we'll talk, you know, baseball, talk baseball, football, talk football. In the Army, everyone is comfortable pointy-talkie on a map.
Yeah.
So being able to show that physical access and placement on a map, and then maybe for us, our link analysis probably means more to us than it would to this logistics officer that needs to know where all of the gas stations are. And we're like, oh, that's crazy because we know the guy who owns all the gas stations, and they are still running gas through all of these lines, and we'll make sure that you have what you need if you need resupply going forward. So it was kind of like trying to relate that.
Yeah, that sounds like some value added to the brigade, the conventional brigade right there. Mm-hmm. And then for those products, I mean, it sounds like if you had a watering hole, I'm picturing all of the teams arriving at the Civil Military Operations Center and somebody in the CMOC actually walking them through these overlays. And then how was that communicated up or out? You have an LNO that is working with the conventional brigade, but that's a coordinating relationship. It's not a command relationship of being tactically under their control or operationally under control. So was that stuff being translated into digital products that you could send to the LNO, or were you guys like somehow or another communicating that so that the brigade was aware?
So we did both. We sent our digital product to their reserve civil affairs forces, and then also our LNO would physically go to the targeting meetings, physically go and talk to the S2, and talk to the S3 of the brigade, so the operations and the intel personnel, and kind of communicate that opportunity beyond the flop. But we have to remember that we're not at the top of their priority. Yeah. We aren't. Civil affairs is definitely not. We don't have tanks, so sometimes you're a little smaller in that room.
Bringing gas for the tanks. Hey, we care about you right now.
Yeah, when you need it, but if you don't need it,
no, we got enough gas today. Well, come by tomorrow.
So it's a little bit of that. You stay humble and keep trying.
But we found ways between like our L&O crew of like Brandon and Freddie to kind of articulate it, whether it was showing them on a cell phone map, being able to just walk up to their map and kind of explain it to them, and then also getting the feedback from them on what they're doing so that we could update ours. Yeah. So I think that relationship that those two had with the brigade really benefited us because it helped with our planning, but it helped us, one, just try and transfer as much information from our map to them so they had an understanding of us, and then getting an understanding of what they're doing and what their next move was so we could, look 48 to 72 hours out.
Mm-hmm. And I will say that this brigade, they were in it to win it for sure. And the few times I had to time it out I didn't want to go and visit the brigade commander like, hey, sir, we're doing civil affairs things when he's infilling initially. So trying to time that out from a commander's perspective was a little difficult. But towards the end, I did go up there when they were in the middle of a fight. Mm-hmm. And the brigade commander stood up, absolutely welcoming in the talk while they're working ISR, while they're working fires. And we did a quick huddle, hot wash. So I think that is like accolades to my LNO for creating an environment where like I still felt like a team, even though we're a very small company and we're only a coordinating line, and really we're using them for a lot of sustainment as well. But that sergeant major and that colonel from the brigade we were all on the same team, it felt, so that was good too.
Awesome. Pat, thoughts on products and communication within the CMOC and to the brigade?
I think the L&O down at the CMOC level, I think did a fantastic job being what I call this morning the ambassador for SOF. The willingness and his actual going up to brigade multiple times a week and communicating not only with the S9, then finding their intel cell, going to their targeting working groups, and just doing demonstration of value of what RSOF and civil affairs specifically brings to the main effort. I think it's very big, especially as it contributes to large-scale combat operations. I think helps to frame civil affairs in the light of LISCO. Because ultimately, CA and SOF is going to be the supporting element to the main forces, because they're going to win the fight. We're there to facilitate, just in a different way. So being able to translate what we do effectively is just so critical. But then we also want them to understand what we do and how effective we can be. So having a solid L&O is crucial.
All right. So before we took our break, we were talking about communication, reporting, products, all that kind of stuff. But we'll move forward. We'll address more of the rotation itself, and then like the products are great to explain, but what are you actually doing at the company and team level to influence the local population? And how are you measuring that? Like, how are you determining if you're achieving the effects that you want?
So I would say for this specifically, you've got large populations, amongst, for a few cities, and then you have two large combat units coming towards each other, right? So a big issue for civil affairs across the spectrum is displaced civilians or internally displaced persons, whatever you want to call it. And so there's this this issue between, okay, have everyone evacuate and then they'll be safe, or tell everyone to shelter in place and then they'll be safe. And really, if you're in the middle of war, either one of those, there's some safety and there's some risk. And the speed of battle, it's sometimes the best thing to do is to shelter in place. But if you're scared and you want to get your family out of there because there's artillery and jets and bombs and all these things, I mean, you're
direct fire and
but you're also concerned about the operational speed of your, of the coalition forces. And if for us, we're not going to just mow over civilians fleeing their home, right? So we would have to stop operations and, take care of all these people. So it's kind of like trying to do the best thing for the population as well as for operations. And here there was opportunities to limit certain resources so that people had to shelter in place. And so seeing not vast amounts of cars and vehicles and persons walking into your secure areas for your operational force was kind of a measure of effectiveness, that there was a lack of civilian movement around the battlefield. And thus, at least what we saw was a lack of civilian casualties at that time as well, which is a plus.
Okay, so if you're taking up resources for military necessity and preventing the civilian population from using them, there's a risk of, well, one, upsetting them, but two, the civilian capabilities that you're trying to leverage, you're potentially limiting as well. And now you can't utilize those resources in the same capacity to move things, to get information, to distribute information, or whatever you're using those assets for. Because if the regular, civilians that aren't supporting the host nation or the U.S. coalition forces, if they're moving around, but the regular civilians aren't moving around, it might draw attention to what they're doing. So was that ever discussion while talking about limiting resources to try and kind of coerce the civilian population to shelter in place?
It was. I think it's taking all things into consideration right before making that decision. I think there was a lot of thought process into it, but it's like a give and take, right? When we do, say, for example, shut off the gas, right?
Yeah.
How is that going to affect everything that's going on in that specific area? But what is the real effect we want, and how can we get it back on later down the line to get that back into action, right? So, doing something bad to help something good is really what kind of like triggered it, right? So when it looks at like, all right, we're going to turn the gas off. So that's going to limit people leaving because they don't have the gas to leave. So they're going to shelter in place.
Yep.
Right. But then thinking of like the secondary and tertiary effects is like, how are we going to get that back on so that when this is past them, like we want them to go back to real, like regular life.
Or like, is it non-permanent? Is it non-violent?
Yeah.
Are all kind of considerations. And then you have to walk through like, okay, well, if a hospital is running on electricity and their generators run on gasoline or diesel or whatever type of fuel, what effect are you going to have on that? And so it's also, ensuring your timing makes sense for what you want to do so that you have, you're not creating more vulnerability in the civilian population, but kind of working within a window and something that's non-permanent, non-violent, that you still have some measure of control over.
Yeah.
Is ideal. I mean, you don't always get that, but where there are those opportunities, you need to make
there's a
count.
lot that could be said about just this conversation. And like, okay, if we're going to get the population to stay in place while we do military operations, we will turn off the gas. It's going to affect this hospital. So how do we mitigate that? Okay, well, maybe we deliver that gas. Okay, do we want the military to deliver it? Do we want a non-government organization to deliver it? What's the face of that? How are we messaging this? Like, why is the gas turned off?
Right.
Are we putting out the information that we are doing this, or are we putting out the adversary caused this shortage of gasoline? And then like, how are we just turning this off? Are we doing like a cyber thing? Are we doing kinetic or non-kinetic? I mean, there's a lot of things that this conversation, right now, but when you were in the rotation, like all these different avenues that you could go after. And then I'm curious, was there, for this example, was the PSYOP soldier brought in and like, hey, we need you to create this narrative while we're doing this?
100%.
100% the whole time. Yeah.
And then was the conventional force aware of what was going on, or was there crosstalk with them?
Yes. Our LNO let them know
the situation, basically.
because it had to be clearly communicated, because it wasn't something we wanted to just do and not turn back on, or et cetera. So the timing had to make sense with where the larger operational force was going to move.
That's a whole other thing. You're talking about windows in time, and like convergence windows is multi-domain operation, like term. Well, yeah, whatever we do has a larger effect. So you want to think about the coalition force. You want to think about the special operations force, what effect it's going to have on the enemy. But then with you guys in particular, you want to think about the civil component that's pro-coalition and against coalition, and like how are all these parties going to be affected by that? I am a little curious, like, with the interplay or lack thereof that there might have been between the reserve component, civil affairs, and you guys during this rotation. Since the brigade does have some people, or you said they had at least one staff officer that was...
So they had a staff officer, they had another civil military operations center.
They had a reserve civil affairs company with, I think, 3 teams.
I believe it was 3 teams.
They also had some PSYOP of their own, but they were mostly focused on the consolidation and gains post-clearance.
Okay.
So the biggest thing, we shared all of our information with them and what we were doing. That way, what we were calling was a warm handoff between what we were doing in cities ahead of the FLOT, and then either moving humanitarian assistance or foodstuffs to storage areas that were, not being taken by the military or by the enemy forces, securing that, and then essentially handing that over to the reserve forces so that they could go with the partner force of the host country, of the host nation, to turn on the gas and turn on the electricity and hand out foodstuffs almost, as fast as you possibly could, so that it was just, you're not creating a problem behind the the operational force behind the forward line of troops. So
Yeah. So like a prime example was one of the generators got messed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or sabotaged, however we want to put it. And we got the piece to fix it, right?
Okay.
And handed it to.
and we had gotten the exact right piece because part of our network was the owner of all of the electrical substations in that region. So we knew the part number, the exactly what you needed to be able to have it fixed and up and running and within an hour. So it's us procuring that through other, through our command or procurement lines, and then handing that off. So it can be, or identifying the person who's going to fix it immediately when the time is right, so that it also is tied in with that information campaign.
Got to get that trigger right. Well, that's a good, addition to the information campaign. Because you want it to be supporting the brigade's maneuver. You have this conventional force that's fighting another conventional force, tank on tank, maneuver on maneuver, and then they have reserve civil affairs and psyops that's really focused on that close area where you as SOF CA are focused on the deep and the extended deep, and getting leveraging the ability to like reach out there without necessarily putting civil affairs teams forward of the forward line of troops.
Utilizing the networks that are built.
But you have the ability to get information from there. You have the ability to move people and things around. And that's something that's unique to you versus the reserve component. And then you're providing that information so that, as in the scenario, the U.S. coalition forces progressively retake this contested area back to the original international border, you've now passed off all this information. The reserve component can then consolidate gains and do the transition of government piece. Does the non-government organizational piece of that, like, are you turning over the responsibility for that as well, like, as they consolidate gains? Or are you still like working with the embassy and the country team and all the other NGO like accoutrements that you would?
We continue to work with them. It's just that our focus will shift ever continually forward.
Okay.
And trying to think of it as, at the end of the day, a civilian and NGO and, even the defense attaché, they have so much on their plate that a civil affairs force is a civil affairs force is a civil affairs force. So, we can only continue to do what we're supposed to do and create operational time and find opportunities beyond the forward line of troops, beyond the FLOT, if there is order behind the FLOT. And I think this was true in real life situations where a FLOT had moved forward. There's displaced civilians, people are trying to check passports and this, that, and the other thing. Your partner force, your operational force cannot continue to move forward because there's people that are either leaving their home or want to go back to their home, and you just create a stalemate for yourself because you can't ignore them. It, decreases your own security. So I think it's creating that trajectory for any civil affairs team, whether it's reserve or SOF, to maintain the op tempo, to maintain a trajectory for all of those things to happen.
Absolutely. Pat, you want to chime in on how the shutting of the gas off went down?
I think the effects they were going for would definitely be in support of, enabling BCT freedom of maneuver, especially supporting, what our Pertuni governor put out, the shelter in place. So big thing there, civil affairs always needs to keep in mind is, what options are we generating for the supporting force? So it's definitely, a good course of action to take, to keep in mind, thinking outside the box of different ways we can get after a solution set. So it was definitely an interesting choice, but I was all for it. I was all, interested to see how it played out.
Mm-hmm. be honest too, it was kind of like our first opportunity to like
Yeah.
do something other than an engagement, and I was ready to do something, and we're gonna do this. I was like, so
CA
I
will
was
bring to
like-
bear.
I was like, I'm ready for this. If it doesn't, if it's not gonna
What's
go
the
well,
blowback?
yeah.
All right.
But in all reality, when it
So
came to
we
that,
just
that kind of
committed.
opened our eyes a little bit to like what we can have effects on and how it could affect the battlefield. Like that, not just that one portion, right? But it kind of just started building and started getting us rolling as it related to kind of those areas.
Because
right?
yeah, and it had the enemy capitalized on it, had the influence, the information environment just not been right. And if you did it maybe with a different demographic that were maybe more supportive towards the opposing force, maybe that wouldn't have been the best place to do it because you wouldn't have beat them to the information environment.
Yeah.
So it was, and yeah, it was one of those like, all right, we're doing something. We're gonna see if our network connect, because a part of it too is this is a new network.
Yeah.
We just met them. Our guy says, I can do this. I can do this for you. And we're like, well, then do it. And then he does it. We're like, you're a liar. You're
All right.
of no use.
Validating it, you know.
You know?
Yeah.
So kind of all those things were going through our head at the operation. I mean, our team was like, our guy can shut off gas. Can we do it right now? And I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Hey, we
Let's think
visited
through
the
this.
gas transfer station and we want to like prove, you know,
We
this
just
guy
stabbed
said-
holes in all the fuel billets. We're back now. Oh no.
well, I was more picturing like turning a big valve on a pipe. And, all right, the gas is now shut off.
Hey, you can do it.
You know, that's a pretty temporary thing. You just open the valve. Hey, okay. But let's peel the onion on this a little bit. So, like, this conversation, like, was this in the CMOC as like a targeting cycle kind of event? Were you thinking about kinetic, non-kinetic effects, and like, what's, you know, was that a battle rhythm event for you guys to do targeting?
That
So, not quite.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Not quite at all.
Not this one.
No.
Okay.
This was a learning one for
Okay.
us as it came to that portion.
It was, I think at the time our CMOC was still like working through getting their battle rhythm set and everything.
100%.
And the team leader kind of like came in right to us and he was like, we have this opportunity. And, you know, kind of selfishly, I was like, okay, like, let me think this through. Let me get like myself, get with the LNO. Let me find out the BCT time. And I kind of did the targeting cycle in my head alone.
Okay.
And then at least my first sergeant, who we found out this is a great strength, where I do everything in my head and I think everyone can read my mind. And
What?
my first sergeant reminds me that that's impossible.
Oh, darn.
He does a good job of that.
And yeah, and he kind of draws me back, and him and I went through second, third order effects, and we worked through all of that piece. And then also, I was still kind of learning what freedom I had for operations up to the SODIF. So my next higher headquarters. So I kind of sent this up like, hey, we've got this opportunity. We want to be able to do it in this time frame around the same time that the ODA is doing XYZ. These are the effects that we will have. This is the risk that we were looking at. And I kind of went back and forth with the S3 because we both weren't really clear on the risk tolerance that the SODIF commander had for me as a civil affairs company operating alone. But that was also a good benchmark between myself and my next higher command on like identifying exactly how much freedom that he gave me to call the shots.
Yeah, where's that approval authority matrix, you know?
Yeah.
You can do XYZ without calling the next level commander.
But had we had our CMOC's targeting working group and our targeting process down, perhaps there wouldn't have even been that back and forth between myself and the S3, because it would have churned enough there with more minds on it than just myself kind of like, all right, we're in this, or we're ready to go, and I was just ready to do stuff, and
we're sending it.
And this was very early on in the rotation, so like she said, we were still kind of getting our feet under us as the CMOC, kind of learning our own processes and systems. So we didn't really have like a targeting process in place yet. So this was kind of our test run. It was very team driven, I believe, from one of the team leaders from 154, and like a very conversation, so much of a conversation with him and the commander. I think that started getting the wheels spinning on how we needed to do things. But even after that, it still took a couple days to kind of get that targeting process in place. I think it was probably like 2 or 3 days later is when we finally, got our targeting process, and that's where we kind of started getting moving.
Yeah.
But that one specifically, no, there was really no like specific targeting process that the CMOC went through. It was very first sergeant, commander, and
so not really
154, which is it's not ideal, but it was a learning curve for ourselves, right? Like and then probably 2 or 3 days later, we ended up like finally having that conversation with Kelly, and he laid out a targeting process for us and like how it should look and what we should be looking for, and then we really started producing targets as it related to that. And I think Pat saw it from the best view, like we built that targeting working group, but that first one, absolutely not. Like, not even close.
That was just, I wanted to get that round
not
out
even
the
close.
chamber and see like what happened.
All right. Well, we got to test it out. So, CMOC targeting cycle. Are you focused on looking at kinetic or non-lethal, lethal, and non-lethal? Or are we more worried about just the non-lethal side of things?
So we focused on a mix of both, right? So we had, I think the one after the fuel was the targeting packet that we sent up to the AOB.
For the AOB.
Yeah, for the AOB.
Sabotage.
To sabotage a generator.
Okay.
So that next one, was the sabotage portion of it, and gave them the specifics down to like, hey, what you should sabotage so that we could get the piece to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like, these are all your options that would give you like X amount of time. Like, this would be really easy for someone to fix. This would be harder for someone to fix.
Yeah.
This is in the middle. Like, it gives you the time that you might want for against the enemy, for the effects that you want, but it also makes it easier for us to undo.
Yeah.
And our team did a really
No,
great job of, so they had turned it in originally, and we kind of turned it back around on them. Like, hey, dig into this and give us the specifics on what this would look like. And they did an amazing job on really getting into the details on it.
Yeah.
So is
through
it
their partner.
one working group working through one COA, or are you like splitting into different course of actions?
So as we got farther in, it was majority of the working group. We were focusing on the next like objective as we saw the brigade coming. So as like looking probably 48 to 72 hours out to when the brigade is going to get to this next objective. So when they were going through Barisu.
Yeah, typically major cities.
Right. So we were looking at
cities.
Rajesh, right? Yeah. And how can we have effects for the brigade as they move forward as it relates to the enemy. So that was really our first one where we went through the complete targeting cycle of like decide, detect, deliver, and then assess, right?
Yeah.
And then tying in what our effect we wanted, and then tying in the PSYOP, like how he was going to message it. I think that one was more for post than we did like pre, during, and post, or maybe it was during and post, but not so much the pre.
Yeah.
But like that really was the first complete cycle that we did as like a CMOC. And that one really kind of like opened our eyes as it related to the targeting process. And all right, cool. Like, so what's the next one? And then it was kind of like exciting, right? Like, we looked forward to talking about it.
So are you, Kevin, as the Ops NCO, chairing these things and then bringing a decision, like doing a target decision board to the commander? Or is the commander involved in the working group as well because you're such a small organization? At
points, the commander was involved in it. I don't think she was involved every portion of it because she was doing commander stuff, right?
Whatever that is.
So like
my
majority of it,
my enlightenment hour.
Our working group really consisted of myself, the CMOC Chief, Will, the Assistant Ops Sean, our S2 analyst Grim, and then PSYOP, and we really just kind of hashed it out, and then we brought it to her, and was like, hey, this is what we're thinking. The first one was really her idea, and then we kind of just built off of it. The second and third and maybe the fourth one were something that we just kind of came up with, and kind of just like was like, hey, you think we're along the right track of what you're thinking? And she'd either be like, maybe go this way, maybe go that way, and then we'd adjust it a little bit. But we had it all written out on a whiteboard.
Yeah.
So we had everything we wanted on, like, what we decided we wanted to do, the effect we wanted it to have, and everything in between. So she could go up to the board and be like, okay, well, boom, all right, this is, how you're going to deliver it. This is how you're detecting it, whatever. And then, well, maybe we should add this, right? Getting her final say really before we like kicked it out.
Yeah, it was kind of less of like COA dev with multiple COAs at our level, just because we were still trying to make that time cushion in front of the brigade's operational maneuver. And so it was more like dictated COAs at that point. But I think had we continued that process longer, we would get further out in time, and then we would be able to do that a little bit more. And what was interesting, one of our other targets that the CMOC developed was a civil disturbance in Rasish. And I was kind of getting, they started to go down a rabbit hole of like exactly how to do it and what kind is it going to be. And I was like, when you give a mission statement, it's the 5 W's, but not the how. And the team, they're the one with their network. They'll let you know the how. And so then it was really interesting pushing it down to the team. And then that team leader made his own team do a COA dev on the how.
Nice.
And he like split all his other 3 team members up and was like, you guys just go work it out and like come back. And so it was kind of cool to see it happen a little bit, I guess, in reverse.
Yeah.
But it was for the best in that scenario.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And then we started to kind of figure out, like, as she's saying, just don't give them exactly what you like. Give them the effect you want with kind of the process, what we're thinking, but let them figure out exactly how they want to accomplish it through their network. And I think that paid dividends. Like the teams, like they'll buy into it.
Yeah.
Where you're still giving you're giving them guidance, but you're not dictating exactly how you want it done. So it allows for their creativity as well, right? And I think that was like a learning thing for us as well.
Yeah, it's more of the art of mission command, and not really like a science part of it.
And then going from like the tactical to the operational level, you got to change that mindset, right? And like I'm coming from the team level where I'm figuring out the how, right?
So there were times it was
so
like
there was
pulling a kitten out by the neck.
So I'm thinking, going down these rabbit holes and like,
that's
we should do it this way.
NCOs are good for you. Hey, pull it back on the leash here. You got to let them develop.
Yeah, and first sergeant and the commander did, because they'd be around when we were talking about it. So they would, if we started going down those rabbit holes, she or him would pull us back out. Like, no, man, like just think through this portion of it. Like, let them figure out the how. And the teams did a really good job. Like we, did it in like 5-paragraph op order.
Okay. Nice.
Like and so
Solid
that they had very specific key tasks, things that we needed, what we wanted, right, and then just let them play.
Yeah.
And I think it turned into a really good process for us. And I think Pat could probably talk a little bit more from like seeing it from a distance rather than being in it. I see what I see, of course, but I know as the OC he probably could elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely this almost like curtailed MDMP, so military decision-making process, was definitely interesting to see put into play, taking that D3A and applying it to actually, task orientation. Because that pretty much became your execution matrix in the CMOC. So then sitting in on your CMOC internal, D3A working groups, your targeting working groups, and then seeing you work through it, with the focus being the effect. Like that was your touchstone questions. What effect are we getting at? And that formed everything. Was really, I think, just having that mindset just changed everything as well. And that was interesting then, because I've seen that before at parallel in previous rotations too, where the kind of like demonstrating value and it was when the AOB commander was trying to understand what cats do specifically, and they found the click happened when one of the civil affairs team leaders said, "Sir, well, what effect do you want?" And he said, "Okay." He's like, "I could work with that. There's like, you let me know what effect you want, and we'll work out the how and brief you back. Interesting to see how that's working out in your side when there's no AOB present.
Right.
So I think that'll pay dividends for you going forward when you do work with an AOB.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Radar, where we talked about the importance of your liaison, nesting effects with the conventional unit, and issuing guidance to your downtrace units. In part 3, we're going to talk about how the CMOC functioned as the only SOF element in the rotation, prolonged casualty care, and how CA is used in large-scale combat operations. Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform.
Actions will determine the outcome.